Hey there, creepy peeps, and welcome to another Weird Wednesday video. Today we are going to be reacting to another article about horror movies. You guys will probably remember my reaction video to Vogue's very controversial article about why 2018 was bad for horror. One of y'all sent it to me on Instagram, late night viewing on Instagram. I think that's their username here as well. Sent it to me, so thank you very much. I'll link your Instagram in the description and a YouTube channel if I find one. And this is on Vulture, so it's not on Vogue. The article is called "Horror is Not Defined by What Scares You." It's by Angelica Jade Bastian. It was posted on December 5th, 2018. I haven't read the article yet, and I'm gonna do it like the same way I did for the Vogue article. I'm gonna read it in real time, react to it. The title is definitely interesting. It's something that if I came across it on, on the interwebs while just surfing around, I definitely would stop and read it. So I'm interested to read it regardless. So let's get into this. Since the early days of film, horror's greatest strength has been its intimacy. A great horror film can slip under your skin, grab hold of your heart, and never let go. Due to this, horror is a genre that has often been defined and graded by the most personal of criterion, whether it scares you or not. Okay. Only one paragraph in, and I'm already not as triggered as I was by the Vogue one, so kudos. Recently, horror has been steeped in a trend sometimes referred to as art house horror, or more gratingly, elevated horror, that has seen the genre become more accepted by major stars and publications. Ooh, we're gonna get into this because girl, I got feelings on this one. These works put a premium on mood and detail with few jump scares or none at all. They are defined by a more dramatic sense of unease roiling through the film rather than wall-to-wall gore. These glossy, austere works include Get Out, Mother, It Comes at Night, Hereditary, and to a lesser extent, the new grim reimagining of Suspiria, which hasn't been as easy to sever from the genre, given it's based on such a well-known giallo horror classic. I still have not seen the new Suspiria, but I've seen all the other ones and totally agree. These are ones that, for the most part, I agree are horror. Even though I did review Mother on this channel, the more it sat with me, the more I wouldn't necessarily label it a full-on horror movie. Got lots of horror elements to it, absolutely. But the other ones I definitely label horror. Hereditary, Get Out, It Comes at Night, terrifying, and definitely Suspiria. So far, Angelica, I agree with you, girl, all right. As horror has grown in scope though, the mainstream conversation around the genre has narrowed. For Vogue, For Vogue last month, Taylor and Trim picked apart this year's horror slate, including The Haunting of Hill House Netflix series, the quickly beloved new Halloween, and the Suspiria remake because the slow pacing lacked, quote, dark delight and intensity, end quote, or because he wasn't personally scared by them. We know how I feel about Taylor and their article on Vogue. We know how the whole community feels about that. Nobody liked that. Let's see what Angelica thinks. A common complaint about the 2016 grimly constructed period piece The Witch was that it was not scary enough. I love The Witch. Don't disappoint me. Filmmakers and stars have also distanced themselves from the genre. In the lead up to his sharply constructed gut punch of a horror film, Hereditary, writer-director Ari Aster admitted to Screen Crush, quote, "Even from the beginning, and this is something I've said before, but I was kind of careful to never really call it a horror film. People that were on the crew, or even the people that I was pitching the film to, I would describe it as a family tragedy that curdles into a nightmare." All of the points to Angelica for referring to Hereditary as a horror film, as it is. But that's interesting. I did not know that Ari Aster didn't pitch it as one. That's super interesting. And in a conversation with Jennifer Lawrence about Mother last year, Seth Meyers said, "I feel like this movie is more disturbing than a horror movie." Lawrence agreed, describing it more as horrifying. Darren Aronofsky himself continuously explained Mother as a biblical allusion, global warming metaphor, and basically everything but a horror film. He referred to it at one point as a thriller, a genre distinction that seems especially created so filmmakers and marketing departments can distance themselves from horror. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I know there are people in the community, in the horror community, that do use the distinction of thriller for certain movies. To me, when I see thriller, I see either this is a high-class horror movie that we don't want to call horror, or it has horror elements to it, so they label it as like thriller. But I don't like, nothing against anybody in the community who, you know, does make the distinction between a thriller and a horror. Personally, I find no difference. I find no difference. It's a horror movie, or it has horror elements. Like, there is just some like taboo around that word horror, like that all of a sudden makes it this low-key D-movie like gore fest, which is so not true. Like, every other genre can have little facets, and you know, you can still call an action movie an action movie, a comedy movie a comedy movie, but it can like dip into all these other genres, or it can go against the grain of that genre, and you can still label it as a comedy or still label it as an action, but not with horror. As soon as it's elevated, you know, it becomes a thriller. It becomes like, you know, all right. I could tell me and Angelica are homegirls. Like, all right, sorry. I went off on a tangent, but I'm glad that somebody agrees. Thank you. Anyways, this phenomena isn't new. It has ebbed and flowed through the history of the genre. For as long as horror has compelled audiences, filmmakers and more high-minded critics have twisted themselves into knots to avoid describing the so-called highbrow movies as horror. Girl. Yes. In Men, Women, and Chainsaws, Carol J. Clover details the conversation around the release of the 1960 Michael Powell film, Peeping Tom. It's a brutal and magnificent film that uses its central serial killer to present a theory about the nature of what it means to be a cinematic spectator. Clover writes, Powell especially objected to the reception of Peeping Tom as a horror film akin to the gory hammers on the British market during those years. Powell resolutely claimed Peeping Tom wasn't horror, but a film of compassion, of observation, and of memory, yes. It's a film about the cinema from 1900 to 1960. Interesting, okay. But again, I just feel like me and Angelica are on the same page here with this, so yes. First time of the recently revamped Fangoria magazine, writer Michael Gingold, I hope I said your name right, I'm so sorry, discusses what it was like to interact with distributors in the 80s and 90s who purposefully avoided horror labels while writing for a publication that wears its love for the genre in all its forms with pride. Quote, the denial of horror was particularly pronounced when it came to the flood of films about disturbed or psychopathic individuals in the wake of 1987's Fatal Attraction and 1991's The Silence of the Lambs, which was not widely acknowledged as a horror film during its initial release as it is now, he writes. Even though many of these films rely on the fear factor and starred a damaged individual threatening and terrorizing other characters that was essentially the same as in Psycho, Halloween, or slashers, these were apparently not horror films, end quote. With New Line Cinema refusing to set up interviews at Fangoria with the people involved with Seven, despite it being, as Gingold describes, one of the most horrifying movies released by them or anyone else in the 90s, the publication had ample opportunity for its recurring banner, it's not a horror film. I mean, like, I knew it was a thing with Silence of the Lambs because I feel like, even though today, I feel like, as the article said, it's more widely acknowledged as a horror film, there are still people that refuse to acknowledge The Silence of the Lambs as a horror movie. Like, it's like, I'm sorry, I don't know what your definition of horror is, but that movie is terrifying. It is a long article though. Okay, we're almost done, it's fine. I like it so far. This is way better than the Vogue one, so. What perhaps separates the current moment from these earlier examples is that horror is being embraced by A-list talent on a more regular basis. When stars are typically in horror films, we associate that with either the early moments in their career before they were famous, think Jennifer Aniston's appearance in the Leprechaun franchise, or when their standing was dimming in Hollywood. Consider Bette Davis and Joan Crawford in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which spawned the haxploitation genre and saw many queens from the classic Hollywood using horror as a jumping off point for a new audience. But recently, horror has attracted prestige more consistently, particularly since Jordan Peele's mega success, Get Out. The stars are brighter and more renowned, Lawrence and Mother, Natalie Portman in Annihilation. The productions feel moneyed, with better design and a glossier budget for marketing. I think most importantly, there is an ongoing conversation in horror cropping up in publications, circles that would not usually give the genre the intellectual study. Critics and cinephiles in general tend to dismiss genre cinema wholesale, and genre fans as well, and seeing members of the community react to these films with such violent negativity only reinforces their image of the horror fan as a slack-jawed dullard whose only interests are sex and gore. Jason Kaufman astutely wrote for Medium about the tense dynamics surrounding art house horror films like The Witch, in which some diehard horror fans dismiss the films as boring and not for true horror fans. There are as many definitions of horror films as there are people who watch them. Girl, like, I love Angelica. I love her. She's brilliant. Thank you. Like, I feel like our brains are connected. Like, I'm just agreeing with every point in this article. Perhaps this collision of so-called high and low culture is what leads to this distancing effect. One of the driving forces behind this infuriating dialogue is the difficulty in defining horror as a genre. Tying a film like Candyman or even The Silence of the Lambs to schlockier fare like the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise isn't hard, but trying to link all these works to something like Annihilation proves more difficult, since it shirks the markers people associate with horror: a central villain, gore, its particular archetypes, for something more difficult and beguiling while also being indebted to science fiction. Ever since I fell in love with horror as an awkward, curious preteen, I have understood its shape-shifting quality as a genre. The first two entries in the Hellraiser franchise are grim and immensely sexual works primed for gorehounds. Tales from the Crypt is uproarious and arc. Candyman carries the tenor of myth and is shot through with a strange romanticism. Buffy the Vampire Slayer didn't only cement my interest in feminism, it taught me the ways modern filmmakers can lead into and subvert the iconography of horror. Horror can be a beautiful genre and elucidates our dark fears and our most taboo desires in ways that are meant to scare us, yes, but it's also expressed in so many different ways. The roiling dread of Nosferatu, the quip-laden joyous terror of Scream, the beguiling romanticism and fear that is braided together in Candyman, the garish spectacle of Tragedy Girls. That can be hard to peg down. Definitely agree. I think kind of what Angelica is getting at and what people have a hard time with is that horror is such an expansive genre. I mean, and I'm totally biased here because I'm a horror fan, but I believe it's even more widespread than like action films and comedy films and, you know, other genres like that. Like, at least to me, as somebody who doesn't watch too many of other genre movies, I feel like the movies are very, you know, there's only certain types of action movies and there's a limited amount of comedy movies, where horror, you have so many different subgenres like within this umbrella of horror. And I think that's what people have a hard time reconciling with, because there are just so many different facets and horror just dips into so many different genres, you know, and uses elements from like action and comedy and all these that people find it hard to, like I said, reconcile with that, and they find it hard to peg something as horror when it's something like Annihilation. All right, home stretch here, home stretch, guys. Despite the genre's flexibility, I think what links all of these works is not how much they scare you, but the underlying sense of fear and the exploration of this primal response on personal, cultural, and existential levels. If you look at the recent crop of films, even those that have been questioned, they all use fear as a framework to shape the characters' lives and guide deep concerns about the world we live in. Hereditary and The Babadook potently explore women's complicated relationships with motherhood. Annihilation continues the concern of horror films like The Thing and how it uses the idea of our bodies being invaded and shaped by strange forces in order to explore loneliness and depression. Mother is a bonkers mythological story about the fear of our most private spaces being invaded and destroyed. This is different from the goals of filmmakers to unnerve and scare audiences, but more about how they approach questions such as these. What fears are shaping our culture? How does fear shape the lives of these characters? And I'm sure many of you can agree, like, just the fact, like, all the examples she listed, like, you can boil it down to, like, some sort of cultural fear or societal fear that people can relate to, like everyone can relate to, and it's just, you know, maybe it's just hard to reconcile with because, you know, fear is kind of like, we all feel fear, but we all feel fear for different things. Although some of these, like, these are fears that a lot of people can relate to, like your personal space being invaded, you know, or, you know, like in The Thing of like using our bodies and, you know, imitating our bodies to infiltrate the human race. Like, those are things that I feel like most people can agree on are horrifying. But maybe when it comes to stuff like Hereditary and The Babadook, where it is a little bit more specific, like, you know, women's relationship with motherhood, that's not something the entire population can agree on, because they can't relate to it. So maybe it's like stuff like that that makes it a little bit trickier for people to peg as horror. I don't know, I'm just speculating though. I can't remember the last time I was scared watching a film. I've been a bit desensitized over the years. Watching Hellraiser at 10 will do that to you. But recent films like Annihilation, The Witch, and Under the Shadow still do what horror does best. Provoked a deeper response that forces you to consider and understand how fear shapes our lives in ways personal and cultural, intimate and inescapable. Great article. Huge thanks to Late Night Viewing for sending me that. That was a great article. Way better than Taylor's article over on Vogue. No, totally agree with like that entire article. And it's an interesting question. You know, it's almost separating feeling scared and feeling fear almost, which is just like fascinating in and of itself to like explore this idea. But it is something that's worth discussing, and I would really love to know your guys' reaction to this article in the comments. So even though the bits were popping up on the screen as I was reading them, I will leave a link to the article in the description box so you can read it for yourself. I really would like to know what you guys think about it. Well, again, thank you Late Night Viewing for sending me that. I do hope you enjoyed this video, even though it was super long. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're new here and become a Creepy Peep today. I post videos Monday through Friday, and you can ring that notification bell down there to be notified every time I post a video, even though it doesn't always work. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, stay strange. Bye! This video is brought to you by all of these awesome Patreon supporters who are listed here on the screen. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you want to find out the perks to being a Creepy Patron Peep, you can follow that link that's in the description box. And if you want to check out more videos, you can click the video that's on the screen right now.